The hammer rose and fell in the same steady rhythm it had for years. Sparks leapt from the anvil each time the iron met the steel face bright against the dim light of the forge. I had been at it since before the sun cleared the rooftops, shaping horseshoes for the traders who would leave at first light. The work was honest. It paid enough to keep the roof over my head and the fire in the hearth. That was all I asked of most days. When the last shoe cooled and the tools were hung, I wiped the soot from my hands and stepped out into the street. Ravencross was already settling into evening. Smoke curled from chimneys. Voices carried from the market square as stalls were packed away. I walked past them without stopping. The thought of another meal eaten alone at the small table in my house held no appeal tonight. Instead, I turned toward the Amber Lantern. The tavern sat near the edge of the trade road, where the town gave way to open fields and the distant line of the border hills. It was not the cleanest place in Ravencross, nor the quietest, but the ale was decent and the fire was always lit. I pushed the door open and let the warmth and noise wash over me. She sat alone at a table near the back wall. An orc woman, tall even while seated, with skin the color of deep forest moss and hair black as wet iron pulled back and tied low at the nape of her neck. A heavy green cloak was draped over the back of her chair. Her eyes were the pale yellow of winter sunlight on old stone, and they looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. She was turning a small cup of cider between her fingers and watching the room without seeming to watch it. I had taken only a few steps inside when her hand slipped. The small leather purse she had been holding struck the floorboards and spilled a few coins. She bent to retrieve them, but I was already there. I gathered the coins and the purse and held them out to her. She looked up. For a moment her expression was guarded, as if she expected something else to follow the gesture. Then she took the purse from my hand. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was low and clear, with the slight roughness that came from speaking common as a second tongue. "Better me than the floor," I answered, "though the floor would have kept your secret longer." The corner of her mouth lifted. It was not a polite smile, it was small and real, and it changed the tired look in her eyes for a breath. I should have walked on. Instead, I nodded toward the empty chair across from her. "If you are waiting for someone, I will not intrude. If you are not, the company might be better than sitting alone." She studied me for a long moment. Then she gave a small nod. I sat. The serving girl came by twice before either of us ordered. We spoke first of ordinary things. The weather had turned colder than expected for the season. The stew here was too salty again. A drunk man near the bar was singing a harvest song badly off key, and neither of us could decide whether to feel sorry for him or for our ears. She told me she kept the ledgers for the healer on the South Street. I told her the forge had belonged to my father before me, and that some days the iron still felt like it remembered his hands better than mine. We both disliked people who made promises they had no intention of keeping. That discovery came without either of us forcing it. She laughed once quietly when I described a merchant who had sworn on 3 separate gods that he would return with payment for a set of plowshares and had instead left town before dawn. The sound was warm and brief, as if she did not often let it out. I found myself watching the way her fingers moved when she spoke, and the way her shoulders eased slightly the longer we sat. I realized I was already thinking of what I might say if she agreed to meet again. The autumn market would open soon. There would be music and traders from farther south. Or she might simply walk with me to the forge one afternoon and watch me shape something smaller than a horseshoe. A ring, perhaps. Something simple. She had been turning the cup in slow circles for a while when she set it down. Her eyes stayed on the dark liquid inside. The noise of the tavern continued around us, but it felt farther away than it had a moment before. "You have been kind," she said. "Most would not have stopped." "I was raised to pick up what falls," I answered, "and to stay when the conversation is worth having." She looked at me then, and the tiredness in her face was no longer the only thing I saw. There was something careful underneath it, as if she were measuring the distance between what she wanted to say and what she had learned to expect. "My name is Valera," she said after a moment. "Valera Stonebrook." I gave her mine in return. She repeated it once, as if testing the shape of it. We sat in silence for a few breaths. Then she drew in a slow breath and let it out. "Darian," she said, "I need to tell you something before this goes any further. I have 2 children, a girl of 8 and a boy of 6. If that changes what you want from this evening, you may leave. I will not hold it against you." The words landed cleanly. She did not soften them or look away while she spoke. She simply offered them and waited. I felt the noise of the room pull back even more. I saw the way her hand rested on the table, fingers not quite relaxed, as if she had already braced for the chair across from her to empty. I thought of the small laugh she had given earlier and of how quickly she had offered me the chance to walk away. I did not stand. "Why would I leave?" I asked. "Because most men do," she said. There was no accusation in it, only fact. "I have not decided what any of this means yet," I told her. But I know I would rather keep sitting here than find out what the rest of the night feels like without you in it." She watched me for a long time. The guarded look did not vanish, but something in it shifted, as if a lock she had kept ready had been tested and had not yet broken. We did not speak of the children again that evening. The serving girl brought food we had finally remembered to order. We ate slowly. The conversation that followed was quieter than before, but it did not stop. When the fire burned lower and the crowd thinned, neither of us moved to end the night. Outside, the air had grown sharp. She pulled her cloak around her shoulders as we stepped into the street. I walked with her as far as the corner where the road turned toward the southern quarter. She stopped there. "You do not have to prove anything tonight," she said. "I am not trying to," I answered. "I am only trying not to leave before I understand what I would be leaving." She looked at me again, the yellow of her eyes catching the last of the lantern light from the tavern window. Then she gave a small nod almost to herself. "Slow then," she said. "Slow is fine," I told her. We stood a moment longer. Then she turned and walked away into the dark between the buildings. I watched until the green of her cloak was lost among the shadows. When I finally turned toward my own house, the street felt longer than it had on the way out, and the thought of the empty rooms waiting for me did not sit as heavily as it usually did. I did not know what the days after this night would ask of either of us. I only knew that when she had given me every reason to walk away, I had found none strong enough to make me move. The days after that first night moved slower than I expected. I kept to my usual work at the forge, but my thoughts returned often to the woman with the tired yellow eyes and the careful way she had offered me an exit before anything had truly begun. I did not rush to see her again. Instead, I wrote short notes and paid a boy to carry them to the healer's house where she worked. The first note asked only if she had reached home safely. She replied the next evening with a single line. "I did. Thank you." The second asked how the ledgers were treating her. That reply came longer. She wrote that numbers were easier than people some days and that the healer's apprentice had spilled ink across 3 pages of accounts. I smiled at that and wrote back about a customer who had argued for an hour over the price of a single horseshoe. Our letter stayed small at first. She mentioned the weather. I mentioned a broken axle I had repaired. Then, one morning, a note arrived that mentioned her daughter had drawn a picture of a bird with fire for feathers and had insisted on showing it to the healer's cat. Another day, she wrote that her son had taken apart the latch on the back door and could not remember how to put it back together. I read those lines more than once. When she agreed to meet again, it was not at the tavern. She suggested the river path that ran behind the old mill. I arrived first and waited under the line of willows whose branches trailed in the slow water. She came a few minutes later, wearing the same green cloak. We walked without hurry. The only sounds were the river and the occasional call of a bird moving through the trees. She was quieter than she had been at the tavern. After a while, she said, "You have not asked about them." "I did not want to push," I answered. She nodded as if that was the answer she had been testing for. We walked another stretch in silence before she spoke again. "Their names are Nira and Rovan. Nira is 8. She watches before she speaks. She draws constantly, flowers, birds, sometimes the same face over and over until the paper tears. Rovan is 6. He cannot leave anything whole. If it has screws or hinges or a lid, he will find a way inside it. He is also afraid of thunder. When it storms, he crawls under the table and stays there until it passes." She paused. I did not fill the quiet. "Their father was a warrior," she continued. "He left for the last border campaign and did not return. Not because he died, because he found another life on the other side of it and decided it suited him better than the one he already had. I received one letter. It said the children would be better off without a man who could not stay. That was 3 years ago. We reached a place where the willows opened onto a small bank of stones. She stopped and looked at the water. There was a man after that, she said. A human. He came to the healer's house often. He was gentle with his words. He told me he did not mind that I had children. He said many men would, but he was not many men. I let him meet them after a few weeks. Nira was polite. Rovan asked him if he knew how to fix a music box. He smiled and said he would try. 2 weeks later, the letters stopped. When I went to his house, the neighbor told me he had left town to take work farther south. Rovan asked me why the man had gone. I told him people sometimes change their minds. He looked at me and said, "Was it because I was too loud?" She said the last part without looking at me. Her voice stayed even, but her hand had closed around a fold of her cloak. I decided after that, she went on, that I would not let anyone meet them until I was certain. And even then I would make sure they knew they could leave before any harm was done. That is why I told you the first night. I would rather you walk away while they still do not know your face than watch them learn another name they are not allowed to keep. The river moved past us steady and indifferent. I thought about the letter she had sent and the way she had measured every word before writing it. I am not going to promise you anything I cannot keep, I said. But I also will not leave because the road is narrower than I expected. You gave me the chance to go. I am still here. She turned then and studied my face as if she were checking for the lie she had already prepared herself to find. You say that now, she said. I know, I answered. Words are cheap. I will try to make the rest of it more expensive. A small breath left her, almost a laugh, but not quite. We turned and began walking back the way we had come. The willows brushed our shoulders as we passed beneath them. She did not invite me to her house that day. She did not say when or if she would. When we reached the place where the path met the road, she stopped. I am not ready for you to meet them, she said. I am not asking to, I told her. She looked at me for a long moment. The guardedness in her eyes had not disappeared, but it had shifted, as if the lock had been tested again and had held a little longer this time. Slow, she said, the same word she had used outside the tavern. Slow, I agreed. She nodded once, then turned and walked toward the southern quarter. I watched until the green of her cloak was lost among the houses. When I finally moved, the thought of returning to the empty forge did not feel quite as heavy as it had the week before. I did not know how many more walks it would take before she decided I could be trusted with the rest of her life. I only knew I was willing to take every one of them. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by the same boy who carried most of the notes between us. I was still at the anvil when he appeared in the doorway, holding out the folded paper with the slightly smudged seal. I wiped my hands on the leather apron and took it. The handwriting was hers, neat and careful, the same even lines she used for the healer's ledgers. I read it twice before the words settled. If you are free this afternoon, you may come by the house, only as a friend. I want you to meet Nira and Rovan. The address was written at the bottom in the same careful hand. I read it a third time. Then I folded it and placed it inside the pocket of my shirt, against the skin, where the warmth of the forge could not reach it. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of hammer strikes and cooling metal. I finished the set of hinges I had promised for the miller's new grain door, but my mind kept returning to the small square of paper and what it meant. She was opening a door she had kept closed for years, not the door to her house, the other one. I left the forge earlier than usual. I washed the soot from my arms and face at the pump behind the house and changed into the cleanest shirt I owned. It still smelled faintly of smoke and iron, but there was nothing to be done about that. On the way, I stopped at the baker's and bought a small loaf of the dark bread she had once said she liked. I did not bring flowers or sweets. I did not want the visit to feel like an occasion that required performance. Her house stood at the end of the street where the tailors worked, a narrow 2-story building with a sagging roof and a door that had been painted once and then left to weather. A pair of clay pots sat on the windowsill, one holding a struggling rosemary plant, the other something with small purple flowers I could not name. I knocked once and waited. Valera opened the door. She wore a simple gray dress instead of the cloak I was used to seeing. Her hair was still tied back, but a few strands had escaped and framed her face. She looked at me for a moment, as if confirming I had actually come, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "They're in the back room." The house was smaller inside than it appeared from the street. The front room held a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bench against the wall. A shelf above the hearth held a few books and a row of small glass jars. The air smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. Through an open doorway, I could see the kitchen where a pot simmered on the stove. She led me into the second room. A girl sat on a low stool near the window, a stack of thick paper on her lap and a piece of charcoal in her hand. She looked up when we entered. Her eyes were the same pale yellow as her mother's, but quieter. An orc boy stood at the table, both hands inside the open carcass of what had once been a small wooden clock. Pieces of it were scattered across the surface like the aftermath of a battle. "This is Darian," Valera said, "a friend of mine." The boy looked up first. He studied me with open curiosity, his small tusks barely visible when he spoke. "Do you make swords?" he asked. "I make more plows than swords," I answered. "Swords cut, plows feed. I have always preferred feeding people to cutting them." He considered this for a moment, then gave a single nod as if I had passed some test I had not known I was taking. The girl, Nira, had not spoken. She watched me from beneath dark lashes, her charcoal still poised above the paper. I did not move closer. I stayed near the doorway until Valera gestured toward the bench. "You can sit," she said. I sat. After a moment, Nira returned to her drawing. Rovan went back to the clock, though I noticed he glanced at me every few seconds as if checking whether I had disappeared. Valera moved into the kitchen. I heard the soft sounds of bowls being set on the table. I did not try to win them with gifts or loud stories. Instead, I watched. Nira's drawing was careful and precise. She had drawn a line of mountains and a single tree with too many branches. At the base of the tree stood a figure in a long cloak. The figure's face was turned slightly away, as if watching something just beyond the edge of the paper. "That is good work," I said after a while. "You see things most people miss, the way the branches twist, the shadow under the tree." She did not answer, but the charcoal moved a little slower, and after a moment she turned the page toward me so I could see it better. Rovan had managed to separate the clock's main gear from its housing. He held it up to the light, frowning at the teeth. "It sticks when it turns," he said, more to himself than to me. "Sometimes the teeth are cut too deep on one side," I told him, "or the axle is not quite straight. If you want, I can show you how to check it later, with a smaller gear, one that will not matter if it breaks." He looked at me properly then, the first time without suspicion. "You would let me break it?" "Better a small gear than your mother's door latch," I said. A sound that might have been a laugh escaped Valera in the kitchen. She did not comment. Dinner was simple stew, and the bread I had brought. Rovan knocked over the flour sack while reaching for a spoon. White dust rose in a cloud and settled across the table and onto Nira's drawings. She made a small, furious sound and tried to brush the flour away with her sleeve. Valera closed her eyes for a single breath, the way people do when they are counting to keep from shouting. I stood without being asked. I found the broom in the corner and swept the worst of it into a pile. Then I gathered the scattered gears Rovan had left on the floor and set them on the bench beside him. "If you need to take something apart," I said quietly, "these will not matter if they do not go back together. The door latch will." He looked at the pieces, then at me. After a moment, he picked up the smallest gear and began turning it between his fingers. We ate. The conversation was uneven, full of long silences and sudden small questions from Rovan about the forge and whether iron could be made to sing if you hit it the right way. Nira spoke only once, asking whether the stew had carrots in it. When I said it did, she ate the rest without complaint. When the meal was finished and the dishes stacked, I rose to leave. Valera walked me to the door. Nira followed a few steps behind, her drawings rolled and held against her chest. At the threshold, she stopped and looked up at me. Her voice was very small. "Will you make Mother cry?" I lowered myself until we were at the same height. The floor was cold beneath my knees. "I will try very hard not to," I said, "but if I ever do, I will say I am sorry. Grown people are supposed to say they are sorry when they are wrong. I will not be an exception." She studied my face the way her mother sometimes did, as if checking for cracks in the answer. Then she gave a single, solemn nod. "You can look at the drawings again next time," she said. I stood. Valera's hand rested briefly on the doorframe, not quite touching me. Her eyes were tired again, but there was something else in them now, something that had not been there the first night at the tavern. Outside, the street was quiet. I walked slowly back toward the forge, past the closed stalls and the shuttered windows. The bread I had brought was gone. The flour had been swept. My hands still smelled faintly of the stew. I had gone to the house as a guest. I had left as something less simple. On the way home, I realized I was already counting the days until I could return, not because I wanted to claim anything, but because the small, cluttered rooms had felt less empty than my own house had in years. I did not know what name to give that feeling yet. I only knew I did not want to lose it before I understood what it was. The weeks that followed blurred together in a way that felt both ordinary and strange. I began stopping by the house 2 or 3 times a week, never announcing myself too far in advance. At first, I came only when Valira asked. Later, I came because a hinge had come loose, or because I had found a small piece of polished wood that might serve as a new handle for one of Rovin's projects. I did not try to become anything more than useful. I fixed the wobbly leg on the kitchen table. I showed Nira how to stretch a piece of leather across a wooden frame so her drawings would not curl at the edges. With Rovin, I was stricter. I gave him a small hammer and a block of soft pine and told him he could take it apart as many times as he wanted, provided he left the actual door latches alone. He accepted the bargain with the seriousness of a boy who had been offered real tools for the first time. Valira watched all of it without saying much. She still kept a certain distance when the children were present, but I noticed she had started asking almost casually whether I would be free the next evening. Those small questions mattered more than any declaration. One night, the rain came hard and sudden, the kind that hammered on the roof and turned the street outside the forge into a river of mud. I was banking the coals when I heard running footsteps. Valira appeared in the doorway, cloak soaked through, eyes wide with something close to panic. "Rovin has a fever," she said. "The healer is gone to the next town. I do not know what to do." I did not ask questions. I wrapped the last of the bread from my shelf in cloth, took the kettle from the hook, and followed her into the storm. The house was dim when we arrived. Nira sat on the floor beside her brother's bed, knees drawn up, watching him with the same quiet intensity she gave her drawings. Rovin's face was flushed and damp. His breathing came too fast. I set water to heat and tore clean strips from an old shirt. Valira and I took turns pressing cool cloths to his forehead and chest. When he grew restless, I held his small hand and spoke to him about the different kinds of iron. How some sang when struck and others only rang. He did not answer, but after a while his fingers stopped clenching. Nira did not move from her place on the floor. At some point I poured honey into warm water and brought it to her. She accepted the cup without looking at me. "Will he die?" she asked, voice barely above the rain. "No," I said. "Not tonight. We are keeping him here." She nodded once and went back to watching her brother. By the time the fever broke, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. Rovin's breathing had lengthened. Color was returning to his face. Valira sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, one hand resting on his chest as if to make sure it kept rising. Then she stood, walked into the kitchen, and lowered herself onto the floor with her back against the wall. She covered her face with both hands. I followed and sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. "I am so tired, Darian," she said at last. The words came out rough, as if they had been held behind her teeth for years. "I am tired of being the only one who stays awake when they are sick. I am tired of wondering what I will do if the next fever is worse. I am tired of pretending I can carry all of it alone." I did not tell her she was strong. I did not promise the road would get easier. I simply stayed where I was, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. "You do not have to carry it alone," I said. "Not if you will let me take some of the weight." She lowered her hands. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying in the way people cry for show. It was quieter than that, and older. A few days later, Korak Ironmaw arrived. He came in the late afternoon, when the light was beginning to slant across the rooftops. I was at the house, helping Rovin sort through a box of old hinges I had brought from the forge. Valira was in the kitchen. The knock on the door was heavy, the kind that did not wait for an answer before the person pushed it open. Korak filled the doorway. He was tall even for an orc, broad through the shoulders, with old scars across one cheek and eyes that had long ago decided the world owed him space. He wore a worn leather cuirass and carried himself like a man who expected rooms to empty when he entered them. Valira stepped out of the kitchen. Her face went still. "I heard you had company," Korak said. His gaze moved past her and found me. A human, no less. I wanted to see the fool for myself. Rovan had gone very quiet beside me. Nira had retreated to the far side of the room, drawings clutched to her chest. Korak did not ask how his children were. He did not look at them at all until he had finished studying me. Then he jerked his chin toward Rovan. "Come here, boy." Rovan did not move. He pressed closer to my leg instead. His small hand found the edge of my sleeve and held on. Korak's expression darkened. "I am your father," he said. Rovan's voice was small but clear when it came. "Father is the one who stays." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. Even the sound of the street outside seemed to fade. Korak stood frozen for a breath, then another. Color rose along his neck. He took one step forward as if he meant to reach for the boy, but Valera moved between them. "Leave," she said. Her voice was steady. "You gave up the right to stand in this house the day you decided 3 lives were easier to abandon than to keep." Korak looked at her, then at me again. Something ugly passed across his face. "You will tire of this," he told me. "Of her. Of them. Men like you always do." He turned and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the jars on the shelf. For a long time no one spoke. Rovan was still gripping my sleeve. Nira had not moved from her corner. Valera stood with her back to the room, shoulders rigid. That night, after the children had finally gone to sleep, she came to the door with me. We stepped outside into the cool air. She wrapped her arms around herself and did not look at me when she spoke. "You see what this is," she said. "This is my life, messy, heavy, never finished. You can still go. I will not blame you." I had heard versions of those words before. This time, they did not surprise me. "I know what it is," I answered. "I have known since the first night you told me. I am not looking for something easy. I am looking for something real. And the real thing I want is standing right here, along with the 2 children sleeping inside that house." She turned then. Her eyes searched mine the way they always did when she was waiting for the crack to appear. This time she did not find one. A breath left her. It sounded like something breaking open and something else settling into place at the same time. She stepped forward and put her arms around me. It was the first time she had reached for me without hesitation. I held her carefully, feeling the weight she had carried alone for so long settle against my chest. We stayed like that until the night air grew colder. When she finally stepped back, her face was wet, but she was not trying to hide it. Inside the house, the lamps had been turned low. The children were safe. The door was still standing. And for the first time since I had met her, Valera did not look as though she expected me to disappear before morning. The winter passed in small, quiet ways. The door hinges no longer complained when opened. Rovan was given a low workbench of his own in the corner of the main room where he could take things apart without risking anything important. Nira received a narrow shelf beside the window where her drawings could be pinned without curling. A 4th chair appeared at the kitchen table, though no one ever said aloud who it belonged to. I did not move into the house. I kept the forge and the small rooms behind it, but the distance between the 2 places grew shorter with each week, until the walk felt less like travel and more like returning. One evening, near the end of the cold season, Nira placed a rolled sheet of paper on the table in front of me. She did not speak. She simply unrolled it and stepped back. The drawing showed 4 figures standing together beneath a tree. One was tall, with a cloak and dark hair. One held a smaller figure by the hand. The lines were careful, the faces only suggested rather than detailed, but I knew them all. At the bottom, in her neat hand, she had written a single word: family. I looked at her. She was watching my face the way she always did when something mattered. "This is us," I said. She nodded once, then turned and went back to her drawings as if nothing important had happened. A few days later, Rovan was helping me sort through a box of old nails at the workbench. He had been unusually quiet for most of the afternoon. When he finally spoke, the words came out in a rush. "Father Darian, will you show me how to make the teeth on the small gear tomorrow?" He froze the moment the name left his mouth. His eyes went wide, and he looked at me as if he had broken something that could not be mended. I set the nails down and knelt so we were level. "Yes," I said. "I will show you tomorrow, and the day after if you like." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, shaky nod and went back to sorting. He did not take the name back. That night, I returned to the forge and worked until the coals burned low. I took a piece of silver-black iron I had been saving and shaped it slowly into a simple band. Into the metal I worked 3 small marks, a single flower for Valira, a bird in flight for Nira, and a gear with clean teeth for Rovan. When it was finished, I wrapped it in cloth and set it aside. 2 days later, I asked her to walk with me again. We went to the same stretch of river where we had walked months before. The willows were bare, their branches dark against the pale sky. We stopped at the same bank of stones. She looked at me with the same careful attention she had shown from the beginning, as if she were still waiting for the moment I would decide the path was too narrow after all. I took the wrapped band from my pocket and held it out. "The first night we met," I said, "you told me you had 2 children and that I could leave if I wished. You gave me every reason to walk away before anything began. I stayed because I wanted to see whether the person who would offer that choice was the same person I had already begun to care for. She was. She still is." I opened the cloth. The band caught what little light remained. "I am not asking because the road has become easy. I am asking because it has become ours. Valira Stonebrook, will you let me be your husband and their father, not because I must, but because I choose it?" She looked at the band for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "I gave you every chance to go," she said. "You never took one." "No," I answered. "I did not." She held out her hand. I slipped the band onto her wrist. It fit well enough. She touched the 3 marks with her fingertips, then looked at me. "Stay," she said. "Not just today. All the days that come after." From behind the nearest willow came the sound of small feet on frozen leaves. Nira and Rovan stepped out, faces flushed from running and from being caught listening. Rovan reached us first and wrapped his arms around my leg. Nira stood a little apart until Valira opened her other arm. Then she came too, pressing her face into her mother's side. We stood there until the light faded and the cold began to bite. No one spoke of what had just been decided. It did not need to be spoken yet. The wedding was held in the yard behind the house on a clear morning in early spring. There was no feast, only a simple table with bread and cheese and the dark cider Valira liked. The healer came, along with 2 of the tailors from the street and a handful of children who had begun to appear whenever Rovan was outside with his tools. Nira had drawn a long strip of paper with flowers and pinned it above the back door. Rovan had made a wooden gear, painted it red, and hung it from the latch so it turned when the door opened. When the time came for her answer, Valira looked at me across the small space between us and said clearly, "Yes, because this is the first time someone has wanted the whole of my life, not only the easy parts." Afterward, the children ran between the legs of the adults until they were breathless. The healer made a short speech about stubborn hearts and good hinges. Someone brought more cider. The afternoon stretched long and ordinary in the best way. That night, after the last guest had gone and the children were asleep, I stood in the kitchen with Valira. The new chair was pulled up to the table. The band on her wrist caught the lamplight when she moved. On the first night we met, everything had felt possible, in the way new things sometimes do. Then she had spoken the truth she carried, and the easy version of the evening had ended. I had stayed anyway. Not because I was brave, but because the person who had offered me the door had already become someone I did not want to lose. She had thought those words would protect her children by sending me away. Instead, they had shown me exactly what I was choosing to keep. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She turned her palm upward and closed her fingers around mine without hesitation. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, the house held the small, uneven breathing of 2 children who no longer woke wondering who would still be there in the morning. I had not come here looking for a perfect life. I had come looking for one that was real. This one was.